Good afternoon, everyone. Trackman 44 here. You know, we've been working on this project a little bit with this makeover of this old Buzz Saw, converting it into for use with any Category 1 three-point hitch tractor, of course. And I got down to the tail end of it, got ready to test it up and everything in the wood pile, and found out that carburetor just wasn't going to cut it. It had been setting too long, so I had to pull the carburetor apart. Of course, I soaked it in the ultrasonic parts washer and cleaned that all up, and then ordered a carburetor kit. And in the meantime, I got involved in one or three other projects. And anyway, I got the carburetor kit, and now I'm waiting on parts for the biggest one of those other projects I got going. And so it's time to go ahead and put that carburetor kit in this carburetor, see if we can wrap this puppy up and get this tractor and buzzsaw down to my son's house. One thing I'm not sure if I brought this out in the previous videos, but every one of these Marvel Schebler carburetors has should have a brass tag on it, and on that brass tag it'll have a TSX number. This particular one here is a TSX 706. If you use that number right there, the TSX number off this Marvel Schebler, you can order and get the exact carburetor kit that goes with this. All your linkages and everything will match up absolutely perfect. If you change your throttle shaft and your choke shaft and everything will be absolutely exact. Whereas if you just kind of go like I did originally with a generic Marvel Schebler carburetor kit, you're not going to get the right components. You can see this thing cleaned up quite well coming out of the ultrasonic parts washer. All that is once it came out of the parts washer, I just blew it off with an air hose and then sprayed it with carburetor cleaner and blew it off again. So it's ready to be reassembled now with the good parts. Again, I don't remember if I showed you all this stuff, but I cleaned that float. That float's real critical. It had a bunch of scum on it. I know I took a video of all the scum and stuff that's on that float, but believe it or not, all those barnacles and all that nasty stuff on there is enough to really affect the float level in the carburetor. But the main thing is the weight of the float will be different, and with the weight of the float different, it's going to have a tendency to run a little bit lower, and you're going to have an improperly running old engine. So those things are really kind of critical. Okay, now I know this is going to look kind of funny, you know, me with a different color shirt on than what I had on just a few seconds ago. But I was uploading the video or editing and all that stuff, and I realized I said some things that were a little bit backwards concerning the float level and all that stuff inside the carburetor. I don't know if sometimes, you know, you think about something but you say it backwards, or you're thinking about something and you say it the opposite of what you really are thinking. That happened in that particular case. But at any rate, this is not that Marvel Schebler, but this is another Marvel Schebler carburetor. This happens to be off of a 4000 Ford. It's basically the same thing. It's just a little physically larger. But at any rate, I was talking about the how the scum on your float affects the level in the carburetor. And what I meant to say, obviously I said that the level is going to run lower, you know, or the float's going to run lower in the fuel. But what happens as a result with it running lower in the fuel, it takes more fuel in there to compensate for that added weight. So the fuel level actually raises higher than what it should normally be. If that fuel level runs higher, okay, then the tendency for the engine to flood is a little more prevalent, simply because the fuel level is just too high, and it draws too much of it through the draft in the carburetor up to the intake, and it wants to sputter and flood out. So that's what I really meant to say, and I said it just exactly the opposite. So I actually cut out part of the video whenever I have the other shirt on, and then I'm putting this in just to clarify what I didn't want you to hear me say that was not correct. So at any rate, you have my apologies. Man, this guy's cool, man. It's got everything you could possibly need. Look, this has even got the nozzle. Now that's a very important component right there. Most carburetor kits don't even come with the main nozzle. That nozzle will cost you upwards of $30, $35, $40 on some of these old carburetors, just that part alone. You know, one of those mistakes I see people make all the time is when they change your the main needle and seat. They use a regular screwdriver or whatever, you know, that doesn't quite fit the slot. They make a specific tool, and that's what this is right here. It's a specific tool that fits the slots on these old tractor carburetors, and that way you can do this without doing any damage to that slot. Some of these things get a little tricky, like changing this choke shaft. You got to make sure everything goes in just exactly the way it come apart, and that's where the TSX number comes in. If you didn't use the TSX number, you won't get the proper configuration on the choke shaft. This might come out on the other side, might be inverted, because there's all kinds of different linkages, connections, because this particular Marvel Chevrolet carburetor may have been on, my God, might have been on 20 different applications, 30 different applications, you know. This gets a little tricky here. Inside this shaft, I don't know that you can see it, but there's a tiny slot right down the center of this shaft, and you have to insert this plate through that slot down inside the intake bore of this carburetor. So I got to get that all lined up, slide right in. Then there's two retaining cap screws or machine screws that's got to go in there. You have to have just a little more than just a small amount of patience to get these things to fit in there the way they're supposed to. But once you get that perfectly aligned, you can actually close this and line up those drilled and tapped threads across that shaft right down the center of this bore. Now I may have to run out to the other part of the shop and get an electrician holding screwdriver in order to hold these screws in place, because it's very difficult to get these in here. Oh, sometimes you can use a little bubble gum, but I don't chew gum anymore. So I got to go get a tiny control holding screwdriver. Old Gator will know about that. Okay, after a little bit of fiddling, we got the throttle shaft in. We got the idle screw adjusted. We got the proper configuration of the parts in here that I had to look up in the directions. It's a little bit different than what the original is. They've got a washer and a gasket that you smash. Use the washer to smash the gasket up to kind of seal from air leakage around that area whenever that bushing wears a little bit, I assume. So now we're on to our adjustments. Typically what I do on all these old things, I'll run them in until they very, very gently bottom out. You'll feel them when they touch bottom. You don't crank them down, just barely touch bottom, and then right from there just back out a half, 1 1/4. 1 1/4 back out is be a good starting spot. You got to make sure you get the Venturi in correctly, not incorrectly, but in correctly, installed correctly. Nothing like a brand new gasket. I've had to make these gaskets before with a pair of tin snips, gasket cutters, and various sundry other parts and pieces. Then your float adjustment, it's pretty critical on these because the height of the float determines the height of the fuel. The height of the fuel determines how well suction is going to draw it up off of there and through your passages and on into your intake. This one here, I believe, calls for 1/4 inch. Sometimes these things call for some kind of a weird, 13, 30 seconds, some kind of weird number. But we're lucky this one here, I think, is 1/4 inch. So I got to get me a ruler. And that's kind of nominal. It's got to be pretty close, but it's somewhat nominal simply because they say from the surface of the gasket. The surface of the gasket, if it's been taken apart and is smashed, I mean, my gosh, you're going to lose a 64 to a 32nd in some cases like that. So, again, it's nominal, but at least we're going to start off with 1/4 inch. If we're going to go for 1/4 inch adjustment, I don't know that you can see this, but we are a 32nd above 1/4 inch. I wish you could see that. This side over here is off just a little bit more. That in there is, oh Lord, that's off pretty much. So this is where it gets a little crude. You don't want to just grab and bend those down because you're putting too much pressure on your seat. And your seat anymore has a rubber end on it. So you want to take the pressure off of that seat. I use a pair of, I consider them precision needle nose or precision pliers, I guess, and hold that securely, and then give that just a slight twist. I don't know, let's see if we can get any closer here. Looks like we're under a 1/16 of an inch of where we need to be. This one here is dead nut. It's dead nut on 1/4 of an inch. So that other side, I'm going to give it just a little bit more of a tweak. They claim to the closest edge, the closest portion of your float. And this one here is very, very, very close. So I'm going to let them go just as is and consider that we did make an improvement on it. So that having been said, there are a couple of old parts still in the carburetor, but the vast majority of everything has been replaced. So we're ready to assemble this puppy, and hopefully tomorrow will be a nice enough day. I'll be able to go and fire this mother goose up, see what she's got to say to us, see if it'll even run now. Double check that for 1 1/4 turns. There's a half, there's 1, there's a 1/4. Should be good to go. All the way down. Half, 1, 1 1/4. New throttle shaft, new choke return spring. We've got bushings and gaskets, got air, power, new gaskets internally. With a little bit of luck, this puppy will fire right up. You gotta tighten these up a little more. But we essentially got a new choke shaft and return spring. Parts all inside there are good. And a new throttle shaft, bushings and all that kind of stuff. We got the power valve adjustment, and we've got the air adjustment. We've got all the springs. And we have the preliminary adjustment at 1 1/4 inches off of the seat to get started with. We also got the main nozzle. That's the most important component down inside there. And also we set the float height according to what they say we're supposed to have. So with a little bit of luck, get a warm day tomorrow, we'll be able to put this on here and fire that son of a gun up and go cut a little bit of wood, and hopefully find that it's going to be running good. So at any rate, sorry for the rambling and kind of stuttering and stammering there, but had a little difficulty getting some of them little parts and pieces to cooperate with my fat fingers, you know what I mean? For now, hopefully this will be the end of this project, as soon as we saw a little wood anyway. So for today, this is TractorMan 44, and I'm out of here.